questions that I wanted us to discuss tonight, which is, as an individual patient, why are clinical trials important to me as an individual patient? And so when you have someone who comes into your office, all three of you, and is trying to decide clinical trial versus not, what factors do you recommend people consider? Or how do you frame, not necessarily an individual trial, but the concept of enrolling on a clinical trial? How do you frame that for patients as they're trying to decide what to do?
This is Deb. I'll actually start out by, anytime, whether it's a patient that I've been following for a long time or somebody who's coming to me for a second opinion or, to consider a clinical trial, I always, what I always do is say, this is where your disease is, and this is what we consider the standard of care. This is what we would recommend in this situation. And it may be one of a number of different treatments. And then I say, one of the things that we do at Johns Hopkins that's different than some other places is that we actually do clinical trials. We try to find new treatments. And so if there's a trial that someone appears to be eligible for, I will describe what that trial is. And usually, and in many cases, I say, this is now like, we just talked about 4 things that you could think about. This is now a 5th thing that you can think about. And those other 4 things are always going to be there. They will still be there. They're not something that, you won't be able to do because you do this trial. The trial is frequently an additional option for somebody. And so frequently that's the scenario. And then it gets into the whole issue of, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what kind of trial is it? Is it a randomized trial? Is there a placebo? Is there blinding? Those kinds of things. And we talk about that. But I always try to couch a clinical trial in terms of what would we normally recommend in this situation? What would we consider the standard of care? And I think that helps people to try and understand a little bit about what, why we're doing the study and how it might be of benefit to them because it's an additional option.
And to add on to that, I think one of the critical questions is how good is the current standard of care? And so, there's sometimes patients and understandably, right, someone newly diagnosed with a cancer is very worried and concerned. And in some situations, our current standard of care has a very, very high chance of leading to cure. And so in those situations, there isn't really a need for a clinical trial. At that point, you don't want to mess with the standard of care. You want to make sure that the patient is getting what they need. And so sometimes patients will come in those situations and say, well, I heard about immunotherapy and I want this, new thing. And I say, no, what you really want is the standard of care because that's effective. Right? And so recognizing the situation and knowing the standard of care is very important. Similarly, there are oftentimes patients who will come in with the preconceived notion that, oh, well, we only do clinical trials when there aren't good options, or the options that are out there are just sort of so-so, or I have no other option. And I would say that's also not true, because there are a lot of situations where even though we have good therapies, that our standard of care doesn't meet the bar of curing patients or curing or the treatment that is required is has a lot of toxicity to it, and there may be ways to improve on that. And so those are situations where you may consider a clinical trial to evaluate. So I think it's always critical for patients to really talk with their physicians and seek guidance on when a clinical trial may be appropriate.
I think, Amy, you probably, after all of us have introduced the idea,